Equity is the secret weapon of property investing. It's how everyday Australians go from owning one property to building a whole portfolio. But here's the truth. While equity can fast-track your growth, it can also put you at serious risk if you use it the wrong way. In this video, I'll break down exactly what equity is, how to calculate your usable equity, the finance structures you need to understand, and the traps to avoid so you don't over-leverage yourself. By the end, you'll know how to unlock your equity safely and how to use it as a stepping stone to your next property. Let's start simple. Equity is just the difference between your property's worth and what you owe on it. For example, if you own a house worth $600,000 and you owe $400,000 on the loan, you have $200,000 in equity. But here's the catch. Not all of that equity is usable. Banks will only let you borrow against a portion of it. Generally, they'll lend up to 80% of the property's value without charging lenders mortgage insurance. So in our $600,000 example, 80% is $480,000. Subtract your loan of $400,000 and that leaves $80,000 in usable equity. That $80,000 can be used as a deposit for another property, or the bank covers the rest with a new loan. This is how investors expand beyond property number one. Here's why equity is so powerful. It lets you grow your portfolio without saving huge deposits every time. Let's say your first property grows by $150,000 over 5 years. That growth didn't require you to put in more hours at work. It didn't require saving more money. It's just the market doing its thing, and you benefit by being invested. If you tap into that growth through equity, you can buy property number two. Then, as both properties grow, you can repeat the process. This is how some investors go from one property to 4, 5, or even 10. It's a snowball effect. But, like any snowball, it can either build momentum or crush you if you let it get out of control. This is where most investors make mistakes: how they structure their loans. There are two main ways. Option one is standalone loans. This is when each property has its own separate loan account. Your first property remains secured by its own mortgage, and when you buy the next one, you create a brand new loan with its own security. This structure gives you flexibility and reduces risk. Option two is cross-collateralisation. This is when the bank ties multiple properties together under one loan. On paper, it looks neat. In reality, it can be a nightmare. If you want to sell one property, the bank can force you to revalue the whole portfolio and potentially pay down more debt than you expected. You lose flexibility and control. I can't stress this enough. Avoid cross-collateralisation if you can. Always push for standalone loans with separate lenders. Your broker should understand this, but not all do. Another factor to consider is just because you have equity, it doesn't mean you can actually borrow more. You need borrowing capacity. Banks look at your income, expenses, your existing debts, and your overall financial position. They'll stress test you against high interest rates to make sure you can handle the repayments. I've seen people with hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity who can't buy another property because their income doesn't support the loan. Equity is only half of the equation. Borrowing capacity is the other half. This is where I see investors get into trouble. They see equity as free money and pull out as much as they can as fast as they can. The problem? If you borrow to the max and interest rates rise, or your property sits vacant for a few months, suddenly your portfolio is bleeding cash. That's when people panic sell, often at the worst time. always maintain a cash buffer. Personally, I maintain a cash buffer between 3 and 6 months of expenses sitting in an offset account. And before you borrow more, stress test the numbers to see what happens. Ask, what happens if interest rates rise by 2%? What if my rent drops? If those scenarios would sink you, then you are over-leveraged. There are also different loan types to consider: interest only and principal and interest. Interest only loans mean you only pay the interest, not the principal. They maximize your cash flow in the short term and are common for investors building portfolios. Principal and interest loans gradually reduce your debt. They're better for long-term stability and can sometimes give you better borrowing rates. The right mix depends on your goals. For example, if you're aggressively expanding, you might use interest only to preserve cash flow. Later on, once your portfolio is established, you might switch some loans to principal and interest to pay down debt and build security. This is not an area to go at it alone. A good mortgage broker is worth their weight in gold. They can help you structure your loans properly, avoid cross-collateralisation, and find lenders who will actually support your strategy. Accountants and financial planners also play a role, especially when it comes to tax planning and risk management. Your finance structure is the backbone of your portfolio, so don't cut corners here. Let me share a real-world example. I had a client, let's call her Emily. She had a property that had grown in value by about $200,000. She was excited to use that equity to buy her next one. Her bank suggested cross-collateralizing. It sounded simple. One loan, both properties tied together. But we restructured it with standalone loans instead. Why? Because we knew she wanted to keep expanding. By keeping each property separate, she had the flexibility to release equity from one without the other being dragged in. 3 years later, that structure made all the difference. She was able to pull equity from her second property to buy a third, without the bank forcing her to revalue the whole portfolio. That flexibility kept her momentum going. On the flip side, I've also seen investors who cross-collateralized. When one property underperformed, the bank restricted their entire portfolio. They couldn't sell, couldn't borrow, and eventually they were stuck. The difference wasn't luck, it was structure. So here's the takeaway. Equity is the fuel, but finance structure is the engine. One without the other won't get you far. Check your usable equity today. Ask your broker how much you could borrow against it, and make sure your loans are structured as standalone, not cross-collateralized. And before you make the leap, stress test your numbers. Used wisely, equity can be a launchpad for financial independence. Used recklessly, it can be the quickest way to derail your goals. If this video gave you clarity, hit subscribe, because next week we'll be talking about long-term wealth planning, how to actually set milestones and build a strategy that lasts decades, not years. And if you're ready to talk about how to safely leverage your equity, reach out. I'd be happy to help.